whether you want to do such things.
All right. Now, the currency has slid 4 cents since the announcement of the super profits tax. Does that mean there has been some level of flight of capital out of Australia?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Okay.
The underlying demand for the currency, which might have been predicated on people thinking, gee, Australia's production of iron ore, of coal, etc., is going to be at such and such a level. We anticipate that, and we'll buy the currency. Why? Because those exports will eventually strengthen the currency. People would anticipate that in order to earn a profit. If they're now thinking to themselves, well, gee, given this mooted super profits tax, given other sorts of developments, we're no longer so sure that's going to occur. The Australian dollars, which they might otherwise have bought, they're no longer buying. So the demand has fallen. Falling demand implies a falling price of the dollar.
But it doesn't necessarily mean a flight of capital out of Australia.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. There's a possibility of a real estate bubble in China. It seems like Australia is actually being propped up by China more than anything else at the moment in terms of mining. If not deeper problems in the very hot Chinese market, is there any? If it is a real estate bubble in China and that bubble pops, are there implications for Australia?
Well, certainly, and not just real estate bubbles, but investment bubbles of in various sorts of areas, in manufacturing, banking, and elsewhere. Basically, what's occurred in China is a magnified form of what occurred in North America and in Europe over the past 15 years or so. The creation of funny money. Where does that money go? Into things such as real estate, into expansion of factories and so on, in order to manufacture the things which Americans, by and large, cannot afford to buy. That sort of relationship now hasn't broken down, become strained. Americans realize, gee, they're not in nearly as robust economic health as they had been led to believe, but in China still geared towards that. Folks who say, oh, but they can reorient their economy from an export-oriented economy towards a domestic consumption economy. That's something which can occur, but that takes decades rather than mere years.
Right.
Now, if it's the case that the Chinese have committed some of the same mistakes that Americans and Britons and others did, that's to say, vastly expand lending, live beyond their means, overinvest, then they have an analogous, not identically, but an analogous reckoning that Americans have had, that Britons have had. That's right.
And the trick is always guessing when that may be.
Precisely right. And then the implications, as you raise for Australia, as you've pointed out, Australian exports are headed more and more towards China. More and more of Australia's export income derives from there and from Asia more generally, which, by the way, people in the stock market are beginning perhaps to second guess and to say, is this a one-way bet? Can China go only upwards? If it's not the case that China can go only upwards, then perhaps people will reconsider, rethink, and reprice the value of assets.
My guest is Chris Leithner from Leithner and Associates. He's my unpaid occasional financial correspondent. I ask him into the studio to answer some different questions when we need to know things of what's happening with the market here and around the world. Is it important for a nation like Australia to have a high level of personal savings, like for the Chris Leithners, the Steve Austins, the John and Mary Citizen, to have a high level of personal saving?
I believe it is, and you've put the question, I think, in a very good way. That's to say, it's important for each individual household to have a high level of savings. What does savings provide? It provides exactly that, a nest egg. It provides a reserve against vicissitudes, against untoward occurrences, and so on. But as each household increases its saving or develops savings, that provides a basis for domestic investment. That's to say, a country is not going to be dependent upon inflows of capital from overseas.
So we can build things so companies can borrow money internally and use it to build factories or whatever they want to do.
Well, that's right. And again, the critical point being that they build according to consumer demand, whether it's consumer demand in Australia or overseas. But the recipe for financial success, the recipe for national success is that households save, those savings accumulate, those savings are invested, and if the investment goes well, in factories, in mines, in services, in whatever it might be, but by savings leads to additional consumption. Okay. Politicians have led us to believe that, we can become richer or remain rich by consuming, and that gets things completely back to front. And they've completely forgotten the point that having a domestic source of savings, it seems to me, provides that margin of safety, that cushion. Now, by and large, English-speaking countries don't have that margin, and it seems to me that's one of the reasons that they're in a real pickle at the moment.
All right. Does the same apply for national governments? Is this debate between the government and the opposition about paying off our debt,
Yes.
whether it's not in 3 years or not, doesn't matter. But does it matter? Does it really matter?
Well, ask Americans now. Americans are coming haltingly to the realization that America's bankrupt. So too are folks in the UK. Now, I hesitated when I say that. Certainly the election recently in the UK, there wasn't much indication, or certainly politicians weren't going to come to the realization that the country is bankrupt. What do I mean by that? Politicians have made promises regarding pensions, pharmaceutical benefits, hospital benefits, which they simply aren't going to be able to keep. There have to be cutbacks. Headlines today that in France, certain cutbacks are economically necessary but politically unacceptable. The question is not whether they're politically acceptable or not. It's that an individual, a household, a family, nor can a government live beyond its means indefinitely. Eventually comes a reckoning. And the trouble, though, is that politicians, bureaucrats, economists over the past generation have in effect said, don't you worry about that. In the long run, we're all dead. Let your children worry about that. Let your grandchildren worry about that. The trouble, though, is that those problems have come home to roost.
I'll speak with you again. Chris Leithner, fascinating. Thank you very much.
I'll look forward to it.